Can you let me know
It's on.
attendees as they
Yep,
come in?
I will. I'll let you know the number we're at. Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started in a few minutes. We're going to let attendees go ahead and log in. It takes a little while, so we're going to leave a few minutes for that right now. Heidi, we are at 15 participants currently.
So as people are logging on, I just want to mention that there's a few short activities that we'll be working on today as part of this session. There's a download that you should have received an email for, but if you didn't, you can go to the website, the Maricopa SBDC website, putting in the URL. It's a hidden URL to get the customer persona activity and position map. These are editable.
I did drop that link in the chat for them right now, Heidi.
Perfect. They're editable PDFs, but I recommend printing them so that you can work on them easily during the session.
We did have quite a few people register for this webinar, so we're going to still leave a couple more minutes for those who've registered to log in because we're about halfway to our registration number.
And again, if you're just jumping on, there's a link to the activities that we're going to be using as part of the session today. Participating in the activities are helpful as far as getting the most out of this time. This is time for you to devote to your business. So if you haven't already, download them, print them. Your time is really valuable, and this way you can fully invest it in your business. Maybe we should get started with a little bit of an exchange. How many are we at?
We're at 17.
Okay, let's wait a bit.
Just a few housekeeping reminders. If you do have a question, please put it in the Q&A box rather than the chat box because our questions do tend to get lost in the chat box. So if you want that we answer your question, we're able to keep track of those using the Q&A rather than the chat. However, we will have a couple activities that come up that we will ask you to use the chat for, which is asking for specific questions to please use the Q&A.
Hopefully you've been able to find out and access those activities. And in the interest of getting started, I know we still may have some people moving on. I think it might be good to just start about hearing about the businesses that are joining us right now. So this might be a good time to test that chat. If you want to just enter in what your business specializes in. So you can just put a short answer, what does your business specialize in our chat?
I haven't seen any answers come up yet, just so you know, Heidi. Hope someone, Chris says his business specializes in moving. We have photography, we have IT security and consulting. Anyone else want to share their business that they specialize in? Please put it in the chat box. How digitizing old home movies, photos, and slides. Hospice care. So those were some of the answers that we got in our chat today, Heidi.
Okay.
So it sounds like a wide variety.
Well, I think it's probably good to get a little more information. I know that we still got some people logging on. If you're just joining us, we're just kind of conversing to get to know each other. I do want to do an audience poll, Laura, if you can have that ready, trying to get an idea out of our participants today. How many of you have a documented marketing plan?
And I have launched a poll for you all. We'll give you all a few seconds to answer that in our poll. And while you are answering that question, just a few more answers, Heidi, for people who've specialized. They're automotive repair, tea manufacturing. We got a couple physical and mental health wellness professionals here today. And then I've also provided the link again for those worksheets because I've had a couple people ask for those. So.
Excellent. So those specialties that you're sharing, so this is sort of our focus today. Knowing your business specialty is very critical for developing a successful marketing plan. So we're going to really dig a little deeper into what some of those specializations mean for your business and your marketing programming.
Right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share those results with you, Heidi.
So 7% have said yes, no, 60%, and sorta. I love the sorta answer because a lot of times people think that it has to be a long, well articulated narration. Sometimes marketing plans look a little different. They can be spreadsheets, they can be a series of documentation that's non-traditional, such as slide decks. So sorta is can be an acceptable answer in terms of the presentation if it covers all of the key ingredients. And that's really what this webinar and the additional great marketing turnaround webinars are about. They're about strategically thinking and documenting a marketing plan so that it can be more effective. So the goal today, just to get you really giving your full attention to your marketing, really thinking about your customer. And today we'll really be talking a lot about the value proposition, or as I call it, your unique selling proposition. Even if you do have a marketing plan to guide you, you may not have had the time to really stand back and analyze this to see if it needs updating in this COVID world. So I would hope that at the very least, the time you're dedicating today, and we really appreciate it, is about focusing in deeper on your business marketing and applying some proven customer-centric approaches to upgrading or turning around your marketing processes so you can get those better results. But before so we're going to be talking about all of the things that lead into market positioning and customer analysis. But before we do that, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the services that you may or may not be familiar with through the SBDC. Maricopa SBDC, or Small Business Development Centers, are part of a national and state network. They offer, our main offering is no fee counseling. Here in Maricopa, we have about 17 counselors. They're spread across the county, so our clients can access them in normal times. We're working virtually at this time. At the end of today's session, if you aren't already working with a counselor, we'll talk to you more about how to request counseling services if that's something you're interested in. We also offer no or low cost programs, such as the one that we're doing today, training programs, and a wide variety of resources and tools that I'll tell you more about. We are able to offer those services because we're funded at the federal level by the SBA. We are locally funded by Maricopa Community Colleges, and we partner with the Arizona Commerce Authority. So briefly, the type of technical assistance that we offer covers all of these topics that you see here and more. And during this challenging time, I will say a major portion of our efforts are continuing to assist our clients as they navigate sort of the whole COVID relief funding programs for small businesses. So that's one important part. But we also help clients identify and access lenders outside of COVID relief. We do financial reviews, we do marketing assessment and planning assistance. We just have counselors that I mentioned are experts in a variety of areas. So we have people that focusing on manufacturing, technology, commercialization, the export and international trade area. And then we work with actually PTAC or procurement technical assistance centers to help clients with government contracting. So I mentioned that there are resources that we make available to our clients. These are some of the examples on them. The first one in the top left, I'm actually going to talk about today. We'll use a little sample out of Growth Wheel, which is a business development tool that we'll use today. Life Plan is a business planning tool. So you could take the information or the parts of our great marketing turnaround series that we're going to do and turn it into a full working documented marketing plan through the use of live plans. So that's a great tool. Profit Sense is for financial benchmarking data, and those are reports that your counselors can run for you. And our market intelligence capabilities come through SBDC Net and IBIS World. So those are our research arm in the SBDC, and we'll talk a little bit about how that might come in handy as well. All of these tools were accessed through, they need to be accessed through working with SBDC counselor. So real quickly, just introduction to myself. My name is Heidi, and I have about 35 years experience. I say about because I don't want to date myself exactly, but I've been doing marketing turnarounds for small business for a long time in a wide variety of industries and a wide variety of markets. I will say that the main thing in all my prior roles as director of marketing, I consistently achieved higher than expected revenue goals, not by employing individual tactics, but by building marketing programs. So that's really kind of our emphasis. I'm an advocate of customer-centric marketing strategies, and that's kind of the focus that we'll do today. However, as an entrepreneur, I totally understand the need to create profitable customers now and to create programs that acquire new customers and retain customers very cost effectively. I've taught marketing and actually sales and business communication at the university and community college level and through other programs similar to SBDC. I also want to introduce Laura, who's already spoken, she's going to be co-facilitating this webinar. She'll be handling all of your interactions. She is a vital contributor to the SBDC team because she handles a lot of our hands-on marketing efforts as well. So let's go. Let's start. I know, pop quiz. So don't worry, it's not going to be very hard and it's only going to take 10 seconds. I want you to just be ready to write down or just even remember your answer. This is going to be really quick, just 10 seconds. Here's what you're going to need to do. You're going to count the number of times that the letter F appears in the following sentence. Look close. Okay. What did you see? How many F's did you see? Giving you a chance to answer. Be honest.
Looks like we're still missing a few, Heidi, so we'll go ahead and give more seconds.
Yeah, you can even publish it if we're some holdouts.
Yeah.
I get there's
So
interruption.
we're going to go ahead and share those with you.
So 3, 4, 5, and a few 6s. Let's see. Let's do this again. Let's go ahead and take another look. So I want you to do the same thing. Count the F's. I'm just going to give you 10 more seconds here. All right. I know there's some answer bias in the poll mechanisms, but let's see what you can honestly report as how many you counted this time.
I'll give you guys a few more seconds. That way we can at least get the same number of attendees answering this time around.
Yes. I warned you.
All right,
I meant everybody that we're interacting today. Okay, so it changed a little bit. It looks like there's a few more 4s, 5s, and quite a bit more 6s from the last time. So let me help you out a little bit here. This is our answer slide. It's easier to count when I make them red. So there's 6. Amazing illusion, isn't it? So most people actually do count 3 or 4 of them, but it's not about your proofreading ability, nor does this say anything about IQ. So if you didn't see 6 of them, that's okay. And for those of you who saw 6 right off, I'm going to put you maybe in the little genius level. But what do you think happened the second time? I showed it to you multiple times and your answers changed. So people saw more F's than the first time. Why? More focused, more trained? I really think this is a good activity to apply to looking for customers because I know that the more tuned in you are for what you're looking for, the better you're going to be able to find the right answers slash customers. So, how does it relate to understanding your COVID customers or reframing your target market? Well, customers are just like the F's. They're out there and they're waiting to be found, but we might be overlooking some of them because we just haven't taken the time to really define what we're looking for. Yeah, I said you're looking for F's, but if you want to find more customers, more F's, you need to really get a little bit more granular. So this session is going to be about knowing what you're looking for so you can recognize your best customer prospects, whether they look similar to some of your existing customers, maybe they're just plain old F's, or whether they're the hidden customers that maybe they look a little bit different. They look like capital letters, which is harder to spot, or maybe they have the same characteristics, like they're the same looking F, but this one is a soft F, like in the ofs that we see on our screen, which are these are the ones that people usually miss, is the ones that are in the ofs. So I just did that exercise to let you realize that we're going somewhere with the idea of focusing in on our customer. But before we start talking about the customer, let me explain a little bit about my belief that marketing is really part science and part art. What I share today is going to include a little bit of both. This is what I call the formula, maybe as a little bit of science and art. It's kind of like solving for X in 4 different ways. So it's the right message about the right product delivered to the right audience at the right time. So with that formula, as we're trying to figure out what right means in each of these situations, we get more information about one variable that's going to help us solve for the other variables. So we're going to dig into some of these today, but also in future sessions of the Great Marketing Turnaround, we'll talk about the other ones that we won't get super involved in today. So we're going to talk today mainly about your target market, which is the right audience part of the formula. We're going to talk about honing your customer portfolio on your market position. So Growth Wheel was a tool I mentioned earlier, has activities to help with this process. I'm showing you a little bit about their overall business concept portion. We'll sample one of the activities so you can just start that discovery process for your own business. But you'll continue maybe on your own or with an SBDC counselor. You can attend the following marketing turnaround sessions. But the most important thing isn't just the tool that we're going to work with today. As business models have had to change during COVID, it's time for even mature businesses and marketers to revisit and really adapt their strategies in a way that's increasingly customer centric. So we start with the customer in any type of strategic marketing plan. And then we'll also address the market position because it talks about how we'll stand apart from your competition. So target market. The purpose of concise market definition is really about narrowing or targeting our market. And a good target market definition contains these aspects. It's identifiable, so we can really identify who we're trying to market to. It's reachable, so we need to have some information about how we reach them in our definition. Substantial, meaning you will be able to create demand out of this market. And we hope that it's stable or growing. Some people, when we talk about really narrowing or using words like narrowing and targeting, wonder why we would want to cut down on the size by segmenting. There are some advantages to smaller markets. If we go through a target market analysis, it puts the odds in our favor, even for mature businesses, to get that right message to that right audience at the right time. It helps businesses prioritize, and this is one of the greatest things I see in a counseling role is um, having businesses that are trying to do so much, and then they grapple with what are they really doing anything really well by trying to reach and do so much. So prioritizing, focusing, eliminating strategies that are less likely to hit your target market, that right audience at the right time, and making things more efficient so that you can boost your response rate. And as you better match your message to your audience through this process of target market definition and positioning, you're going to be more efficient and cost effective. You can still attract customers outside of this defined target market or segmentation, but you're going to attract more quality customers with this sort of divide and conquer method. At least by carefully defining, it will be easier to reach them. So have a little patience with us as we walk through today's session, because we'll get into the honing of the messaging and the tactical stuff in future sessions. But right now we're focusing on those customers so that we can get into the messaging part, the building name and brand recognition, the ability to satisfy and retain customers. So who is your target customer? Everybody is not your target customer. It's likely that your business will have different or multiple market segments. And so your strategy in order to be most effective is probably going to be what we call segmented. When we go through the exercises that we're going to do, I recommend not just asking who is your customer, but also ask who isn't your customer. People who won't value what you're doing are not your customers. I think back to the beginnings of before there was Red Bull. Its predecessor kind of was a product called Jolt. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that product, but it was developed in a competitive market, the cola market, and their slogan was all the sugar and twice the caffeine, which really set it apart in its heyday. But it was pretty important for them to understand who wasn't their customer. Jolt actually has had a sort of a rebirth in recent times. Its current labeling addresses this, and that's why I use this as example. They actually label on their product, this is not a drink for children. So they're pointing out, obviously who is not their market. But I guarantee that it's also not a product for maybe older adults that want to be in bed by 8 o'clock and can't afford that caffeine rush, or maybe people who don't want those calories or can't have them. These are people that are not their customer. But there is an ideal audience for that quadruple shot enhanced caffeine energy drink. Jolt and Red Bull and their market are hyper focused on that audience. So that idea of who's not and who is your customer are equally important. And before you start thinking, oh, this is also obvious, let me remind you of those F's. There's a lot that becomes clearer as you really dig into defining and segmenting your market. I like to not quote, but mention some of the words that the author of the duct tape marketing strategy or book, he says that you should start all your marketing by profiling your ideal customer. So this is one case where profiling is considered a positive. So he wants you to, his words, focus intensely on one person, whether he or she is your customer directly, or maybe it's a decision maker for a business customer. Doing all of this is what helps you craft the better strategy. So you give that person or that persona an income, likes, dislikes, favorite movies. You really create an idea of what drives him or her, what they really want from you. Where do they live? What do they drive? You want to know this persona as a representation of your market, and you want your entire team to know this person. So the process that you do to get there, and we'll sample this process in a minute, are really about getting to know and recognize all of our F's, our customers, so that we know them very well and we don't miss the opportunities. But furthermore, they actually will lead us into our marketing decisions. So I mentioned Growth Wheel earlier. Growth Wheel uses a framework called the customer segments to define target markets. Their framework, many of you seen, are based on the 4 categories of defining a target market. Each of these areas have further sub criteria, which areas we segment depend entirely on your business and your business concept. For instance, the more homogeneous your market is, the fewer segments you might have. If you have a lot of unique sub target markets, you may have to do more different market definition in each of these 4 categories. To start with, you will look at each of these, and we'll talk about each of these 4 categories in a second. But to start with, you're going to get really as detailed as you can. The more detailed you get in each of these areas, the better the chances of your right message reaching the right audience. So you really don't know all of the answers until you start to analyze your customers and potential customers in this way. It's really a key point of this framework that companies have far more potential um, finding customers beyond those initially obvious ones when they go through this process of definition. So in case you're not familiar what these terms mean, I'm going to go through them really quickly before we start the exercise. So this is the basic demographic information. It describes population in terms of characteristics such as age and income. These are measurable aspects. Gender, marital status, education, employment, ethnicity would all fall in this category. But they can get very, very granular depending on how important that is for reaching your customer. For instance, on age, you can make specific cut points of ages. Or often marketers use clustered age ranges or generation cohorts, such as the baby boomers or Generation X or millennials. I kind of suspect there might be a COVID generation label coming out. I don't know. But you will be able to, even though these groups are sort of debated in terms of their cutoff points, and it's not exact science. You can use this information and it will help you define things like their media consumption and the market size and other things that are really important to reaching your customer. Whether you do it by age cut points, ages say 16 to 24, or whether you do it by labeling them as a generation is up to you. But those particular ways are an example of a demographic. Um, Always think of things in this area as something that you can really measure and define. A lot of this is sort of census-based information. Um, Laura, can we do a raise hands? Can we do a raise hands in this? I'm trying to find out how many of you are B2B or have businesses as your target markets to give me an idea.
We can do raise hands.
Okay.
If
So
the, yep,
if
there we
you,
go.
yeah, raise hands if you are B2B, because demographic targeting is often actually more available for business to business than consumer markets. And in this case, you would be talking about business size or products made. You could include maybe even things such as software platform compatibility if it's a technology arena. Um, so really, if you're in the business to business side, maybe you have a CRM or customer relationship management software, and ask yourself what fields you're tracking. Are they enough? Do you need to look at them? Demographics are possible. All of these categories are possible in B2B. Do we have a lot of B2B?
Looks like we have about 5 currently in our
Okay. So
attendees, at least that responded.
I'll try and remember to give the exercises here are kind of more geared to a consumer market, but they're all applicable to B2B. So we'll try and give some examples in that arena as well. And if you have questions, we can always go into that in a little bit more depth. So demographics are an important first cut. They're a first cut because they are, first of all, very measurable and available to us, but they're not enough. Then we look at geographics. Geographics are where your customer lives or maybe even where they work, where they may attend other functions. It could be really divided into categories that are more like urban versus rural or climate categories, cold versus warm. It could be sometimes more generalized in terms of local, regional, national, global. For instance, the internet gives us the ability to really market globally, right? But is that our target market? Where are we really trying to reach our customers, even though we might be availably able, as we said before, to talk to everyone? Who are we really trying to talk to? Geographic is maybe one of the areas that is sort of changing in how we define it, as far as maybe not an exact physical location or address or city or state, but in these other areas such as cold or warm climate or different types of geographical associations. The third category is psychographic, and this involves grouping people with different, grouping people who have similar attitudes, interests, and opinions. I like to use the acronym VALS, VALS, for this, and it stands for values, attitudes, and lifestyle. So those things can give you a picture of what we're looking at in terms of a total picture of our customer. Um, this, you can think in your head right now, and you can even jump ahead to this audience lifestyle analysis really affects the ways that you're going to choose to communicate them, tapping into their work, their recreation, their family lives, and the things that they value and the attitudes they have. Some sort of overarching examples of psychographic marketing include things like the fashion industry or people who are doing green marketing initiatives, health marketing related, which is going to be a big angle maybe for some people or businesses that it wasn't in the past, trying to make their products and services more safe in this environment. COVID times have really altered people's lifestyles and their attitudes. It's ultimately changed their behaviors. And so this is a great place to take out your magnifying glass and really look at your customers and see what might have changed in terms of their values, their attitudes, and their lifestyles. Um, so let me just give a quick example. Let's say you have a product that targets people whose values and lifestyles around self-care is a big priority, and you distribute your wellness products at spas pre-COVID. And it was really successful because it really matched your end users' values, their lifestyle as regular spa goers. But due to changes in attitudes about safety, this target market really decreased. They're not going to spas as much. They still have a value of self-care and wellness, but their buying behaviors changes. So instead of going to get a facial, maybe they might doing at home facials. And you have to start to ask where they are turning to purchase their products, or maybe their attitude has actually changed and they are no psychographically interested in that anymore. Their attitudes about self-care are still there, but facials are not the value priority. What is their value priority? And does your product still fit? Or is it time to reposition it to fit the valued priorities of the customers as they've evolved? Um, Asking these questions and asking, is this segment still identifiable, reachable, substantial, and growing? Back to the B2B businesses, they also have values and attitudes. They have values related to power or security or credibility, things that matter to them. So psychographics are tricky because they're getting into the head of the customer, but they are really linked to the last category, which is a little bit more observable. And buyer behavior is about the shopping process, and shopping isn't just buying things; it's really a psychological experience. So we try and in this last category understand the behavior of your buyer so that we can more successfully market to them. So as we market to segments that are defined by behavior, it's basically the way a customer might choose or use or act toward a product. Um, and if you'll notice, all of the things above, as far as mostly demographic and psychographic, influence people's buying behavior. Their cultural, social, personal needs, their psychological things all influence their buyer behavior. So these are all interconnected. And even in B2B, there are influencers on this level as far as purchase behavior, convenience, quality. Maybe they have a purchasing protocol, a vendor list, things that have to do with how they're going to behave. So let's play with this a little bit. Based on our amount of time here, instead of looking at a full market segmentation analysis, we're going to do a representative exercise that relates to a customer segment that you have found to be critical to your business survival during COVID. You can also do it to any segment that you wanted to focus in on today. Remember, as we go through this, we're talking about creating a persona. So I'll talk about what that means, but this is an example customer. So it's representative, it's not all customers. again, this is sort of where profiling of your best customer is acceptable. So to do this activity, you will need to have that decision sheet called the customer persona from Growth Wheel that I have given you the link, or Laura has put in the chat. So I recommend printing it so you can work on it more easily. But if you can't print it and you want to be able to work on it on your computer, you can do the workarounds that I'm going to do in Adobe if you have editing abilities. The reality is that you can use a blank piece of paper to do this exercise. You don't need to have any of these guidance tools. So as you pull that up, let me talk about what a persona is. So a persona is a way that you can it helps you define your ideal customer, as I mentioned from duct tape. It is something that you'll then use for the later steps in your marketing planning. It is recommended on so many different levels, especially if you do direct marketing. In fact, HubSpot, one of the leading CRM software applications, recommends it. You have to do this ideal customer profile. I think they even have tools that help you build them from your database. But whether you're using a CRM or not, creating this persona can help you craft better messages. It helps you select which media to use, and it really helps you tailor your marketing activities. So we're going to use that growth wheel format, and it looks like the page that I had shown you. As I said, the value is in a pretty format. The value is thinking through it and processing it. So if you just want to grab a piece of paper, that's fine. So what we're going to be talking about is the persona, which represents an important customer segment. You might do multiples of these. We're just going to start with one today, and it's going to process or personify the information we already talked about: demographic, geographic, psychographic, and buyer behavior. If you've been in business for a while, you should be able to think of a customer fairly easy. And often it's going to be what I call a composite sketch. So it might be several customers combined into one. You again are going to have different segments. So when you're combining them into one, try and focus on sort of that commonality on your customers. What I like to do is start with on the most obvious, meaning like the most profitable. So if you can think about your customers that are your biggest or your most profitable, and maybe that will help you envision this persona that you're going to create. Um, I also like to recommend, if you can sort of focus in on that stable or growing segment during this, especially during COVID, it helps you kind of figure out where you're having your successes. So we're going to be creative here, but this exercise should help you adapt and change if that COVID market angle is your goal. So we're going to Oh, and then the last comment is that this also works for B2B, as we already talked about. In this case, you might be deciding to focus on the profile of the company and create not really a persona, but a company level persona. But you could also target one of the decision makers in the organization. So let's get started. I'm going to open my form in my window.
Hey, Heidi, I do have a question from someone who maybe wants some advice if they're new to the marketplace and they might not know how to choose a group when filling this out. What advice might you give them?
So depending on your product or service, when you've gone through the concept of thinking about it, you're designing this based on a need. And a lot of times you're going to have to be a little bit more creative if you're a startup. But thinking about this in a brainstorming way of who would be the ideal buyer, consumer for your product, who's um, who's most likely to have the need solved, their problem solved by what solutions your product offers. That will help you. And as we go through some of the steps of it, I think it might become a little bit more clear, how you're finding that particular market. Again, an existing business is going to have some advantages to draw upon, but you can even think about in your market or industry, using examples from other members of the industry, such as your competitors, and think about some of their profile customers. Most people who are designing a product around a solution or need have an idea of who that problem is going to help most, and that's what I want you to focus on. Thank you. All right, so 10 minutes is probably not going to be enough time to go in depth, but we're going to just use this time to get an understanding of the process and look at doing one of these together. So let's say that I'm going to create a persona for a user, actually a user who is also the buyer, because sometimes the user is not really the buyer. Someone might be buying it for someone else to use, a parent buying food for a child. But we're going to pretend that we're going to do a persona for a user persona. I'm going to actually just say that I am creating a persona for a really hip upscale hair salon that targets working women. So that's going to be sort of my persona that I'm creating. And I want to target directly to the buyer who is also the user for that. So I would fill out items like their age. And in this case, I'm really honing in on a particular person. Sometimes it even helps to name your person. You might, say this person is, has a name. Some of the times that really helps for people referencing their persona as they develop different segments and different personas. It's okay to, and so I have this, Jessie is a female actually. Um, and I'm thinking through these left side criteria here, which are facts that represent the demographic and the geographic. So Growth Wheel doesn't have them named that, but this left side, the customer facts, the facts are usually centered in on the demographic and the geographic elements. One thing I will say, if you are using, and I won't spend a lot of time on the pros and cons of using the editable Adobe, but um, you can change, if you're doing this on paper, these, and I would like you to change these headings based on what needs you have for defining your persona on your industry. So let's just say instead of education, maybe isn't the most important thing for my market. Maybe it's more important that household information is more important. So I'm changing and I'm going to include household information. I want to explain that Jessie is married with young children. It's going to be a little small here. Um, she's self-employed and works at home. And so you get the idea. I want you to make sure that you do include some geographic information. I'm going to say that Jessie lives within 20 minutes of the salon. I'm going to base that on the fact that I did market research with our SBDC counselor, and I found that the industry norm for hair salons travel is 17 minutes. And I know that our COVID measures are attracting customers from further away. So I'm expanding a little bit and saying I want somebody with a drive time of 20 minutes. So this is just kind of getting you the idea of starting out with that left side. And I'm going to give you a few minutes to go ahead and complete the left side of your persona. We're not going to take a ton of time on this, but I want you to just take some time while I shut up and think about what areas that you would put in that left side information, facts on your customer persona.
And during this time, if anyone has any questions that come up, again, Heidi's here to support you with that, so be sure to put them in the Q&A section. All right, I did have a question come in for you, Heidi. So one person says that their clients are over the age of 60. What demographics and geographical location does she need to put instead of position, etc.?
So if just because they're over 60 doesn't maybe necessarily say whether they're employed or not employed. So that could be important. The position, I think, is implied. Again, I don't know that all those categories apply to every single um, industry. Those are example ones in Growth Wheel. So in the area of position, you might want to change that to employment. You could talk about your target market's employment. Are you targeting a person over 60 who's employed or not employed in this particular segment? And if so, if you can get even more granular, then that's helpful. Geographic, same kind of thing. I talked about examples about how the geographic definition is changing as we go into a more digital marketing arena. Sometimes it's just easy to look at likelihood of where might be purchasing. So if there are clusters of areas where people over 60 congregate or live, geographically, those could be some target areas. I know it just comes to mind when you look out here that there are certain areas like Sun City and things like that that make sense if you're going on a local, but you might even think of, if you're thinking more broadly, states that have a high demographic of people within your age group or category.
That kind of answers the next question that we did have. If someone sells all over the country, is there a way that they could or should narrow their location?
Yeah, I do think that you have to be a little bit creative in this arena. That's why I mentioned in geographic, people are starting to describe geographics. It could be, let's just say you're selling products that are for, cold weather. So you might just define it by, weather as opposed to a specific city or region from that standpoint. So thinking about it a little bit more creatively will help. And I'm going to let you finish up kind of on that section. I know you may not have that completely done. So if you want to stay focused on that, that's great. Or if you can leave that for a second, I want to switch over to the right side and give you an example of how you would complete the persona on some of these tricky areas that have to do with psychographics and buyer behavior. These are the side that says thinking, feeling, doing, and going. So I'm going to say something about the fact that these are all these labels are prompts, and I really want you to see what makes sense about your own customers. I use the acronym values, attitudes, and lifestyles, so it kind of is another way of looking at the same stuff. The top area in terms of thinking is really about the beliefs and the values and the attitudes. So these labels, ideas, assumptions, opinions, they may change. You may have a different label here. You may not have something for each of these. It's really an example. But for sure, the pandemic has caused some new beliefs and some new attitudes. And those attitudes about COVID might vary dramatically based on people's personal circumstances and preferences. We know there are some demographics who are not changing things a whole lot or are being accused of not changing things a whole lot, and others who are changing things so drastically. Retailer success in this post-pandemic market really kind of hinges on understanding the why behind it, which is what we're getting in terms of thinking. Why people may still be visiting places or using brick and mortar, and why digital commerce is a better option in some places. Really, as we look at these particular categories and you fill them out, just more or less imagine that you're that person again and go into that question about what am I thinking? What are my attitudes? How have my attitudes changed in this arena? And then on the feeling sense, these are the hopes and dreams and worries and fears and preferences. A great one to focus on this one is interests. And I like interests outside of your business offering or topic because it helps you locate and reach your customers in other arenas. It might even open doors for cooperative marketing efforts. So let's say our buyer of the hair salon, Jessie, let's say that one of her interests is meeting friends, and let's say she likes fine wines. She's a connoisseur, which she apparently did a lot more during COVID. She reluctantly still enjoys her fine wines, but maybe more alone than she would like right now. So that could help us down the road as we're thinking about ways, and I'm jumping way ahead here and say, she um, might we might offer some type of promotion that has to do with, if it was legally available to us to have a champagne or a fine wine hair session where she could combine that need she had for socialization wine with her haircut, because we've learned about some of her other needs that aren't being met during this time. That's the feeling section. And then before I give you a little more time, let me go over these other two sections and then we'll give you some more time to look at it. Let me just say that in the feeling area, things like a preference for social responsibility or green marketing is something you might put in there. People really do have preferences, even if they're doing purchasing online. They still may be skeptical. They may have preferences relating to, how do I get the right size, or what do I do about returns, or if you're still in a brick and mortar situation, what are the concerns or what is critical for this persona during COVID? This is the place to add that type of information about how your customer is really feeling, their attitudes about the current times. So doing this section of doing and going are, as I said, the more buyer behavior. So if you can think in the doing category of how your customer interacts based on their day-to-day activities. I'll give you an example, and this is maybe helpful for the B2Bs who we've kind of not focused in on this persona. But when I owned a printing business, my ideal persona that I created, my business customer persona, was based on a real customer, and it was a large pizza chain that I did a lot of business with. So when I looked at this area of what else they were doing, I saw that they were doing a lot of event marketing. Under this behaviors section, I noticed that they had attended a ton of events. And so in my analysis, I connected this eventually to their need for banners and event signage. So again, just jumping way ahead, when I use this information, it gave me some options. Well, for one, I could actually offer a new product. I could actually start selling banners and event signage if I wanted to expand my market offering to address a real need to a customer that was already lucrative. Or what I actually did, because I wanted to focus on our core competencies, was do a cross promotion deal with a sign company that offered banners and events. Well, we exchanged marketing, we added new customers to both of our lineups, and expanded both of our business. And so that's just kind of how doing some of these exercises are designed to really open up doors to your thinking in terms of marketing and promotion. So back to doing, as far as your consumer persona, in this area, and it's not listed on here, but I highly recommend you look at media preferences here. So actually we can edit and change these boxes. So let me just say, instead of responsibilities, I'm going to make this media. And Jessie is a real social media participant. She likes Instagram as her main platform. So thinking about what type of other media, it doesn't just have to be social media. It could be old school, new school. List is as specific as you can. Types of music and things of like that nature. Then going into the last category of, which is really articulated in terms of your, you might also, another good one here is activities for that marketing purpose. You might think of things that, as I said, that this persona also does. Maybe she has a yoga studio membership, but after being forced to switch to offline, she's now happily back in class with live protocols. And so that identity and having that knowledge about some other activities that she does might come in handy as we craft our message later on in the next steps through positioning.
We do have some questions that came in, Heidi,
Mhm.
about this particular side. Some are struggling to see the difference between thinking, feeling, and doing and going. Could you explain these in simple terms?
So I guess I wouldn't get too hung up on the idea of whether you're putting it in the exact right category. These are prompts to get you to start to put down ideas. Growth Wheel uses different labels than I talked about. But all of these areas, thinking, feeling, doing, and going, are just supposed to be easy words that help you get into the minds of the consumer and do what I told you before. What are their values? What are their attitudes? What are their lifestyle factors? What are some of their opinions, interests, concerns? And it's not right or wrong if you don't get those in the exact box. It's just the prompts. So as we go into the going one, I like to think of going as the area to really put down the buyer behavior, how your persona operates. So that's another way of thinking about it. Does this, so in Jesse's case, does this persona book regular hair appointments every 4 to 6 weeks, or does she like the last minute, being able to get in on a last minute? These um, buyer behaviors could be in general, and they also can be very specific to buying your product or service. Think of things like what influences your persona when you're looking at this going area. Is this person a deal chaser? Do they like coupons? Is he a Yelp reviewer or a reader? Does he like to get the testimonials or the star ratings? Um, Understanding that aspect is important. So these areas, don't get too hung up on whether it belongs in thinking versus doing. Instead, look at these as guidelines and go back to my earlier definitions about psychographics and values, attitudes, lifestyles, buyer behaviors, that type of thing. So I know I'm trying not to get too far behind in our timeline here, so I'll give you a little bit more time to think about that. And as I do, Laura, were there any other?
Not that I saw, but as a reminder to those, if you are placing questions in the chat, those tend to get lost just because we get a lot of back and forths in chat, whether they're private or not private. So if you could please place any questions that you have in the Q&A, that'll really help us make sure that we answer your question rather than your question getting lost in our chat box.
Right, let me just give you another minute to see if you can digest that last thought process on the right side. So there's a likelihood that you have some more work to do on this. We're actually not, because of time, not going to spend time with what's down here. It's actually really more of the conclusion areas and even more customization. But for example, the hair salon, maybe the challenge or the needs have to do with quick turnaround since the persona has kids at home and less time for salon services as they're teaching their homeschooling their kids or something of that nature. Um, I really do want to kind of debrief this activity, and it might help answer some of the questions and give a little bit more clarity. You know, realistically, we're just doing a sampling of it. This 10 minutes is not really enough for you to get your entire persona defined. But I want to first check in with you and just to see where we're at. Laura, if you could put the poll up, I want to find out about how this idea of profiling and this exercise might be different than what you usually do or think of regarding your customer. So if you can give me some feedback as we go forward. So just give me an indicator on whether this exercise was so easy for you. I mean, you just had such a clear vision. You could write down and profile everybody or every aspect of your customer from demographic to psychographic. Or maybe it was just eye-opening and you came up with just one or two good new nuggets. If it was difficult, like you really had some struggles trying to figure out your customer attributes, or anything other, I guess you can put it in chat, Laura, if there's some others that we can discuss.
I'll give them a few more seconds to put that in. It looks like only 2 others responded with that they have some other thoughts.
When you think we have a good representation, giving us some feedback really actually helps us refine it, but it also helps me tailor some of what I'm talking about, as we go forward.
One person did say they chose other because they did not know personal attributes about their customer. Okay, we'll go ahead and end the poll, and then I'm going to share those results with you, Heidi.
So, and this is a good sign that doing even 10 minutes of this has given you some new ideas, or a good portion of you some new ideas about your customer. I think that there's, like anything, levels of effort that are going to deliver higher levels of results, right? So the investment kind of is going to contribute to that. So this little kind of, I call it sampling of what this exercise will do, is kind of enlightening and may encourage you to go a little bit deeper. And we'll talk about ways to do that. And yes, it is going to be challenging. And let's talk about some ways that might make it a little less difficult to do that. So as we debrief this, I want you to really think about what you're doing differently. And so what you can change, what surprised you, what things that you had not considered about your customers in the past. Those are the things that are going to help sort of lead you further down this path of discovery, make it easier for you as you come forward in defining a persona. What I like to think about is, as you get your persona down, then you can start to use this information to clone additional profitable customers. So yes, businesses that have some example profitable customers to start with and can really delve into understanding all of that thinking and feeling behind those customers, which we'll talk about how they might do that. Those are at an advantage because they can clone and make more of them. In this process, I gave you example of my my pizza customer. Sometimes out of just this process, new marketing methods come to mind that we can use down the road as we go ahead and work with all of this. So I think that that's another value in it that gets built upon later. You might not see it right away as you do the process. Also, I think that today this is an even more valid process because these challenges might be very distinctly related to COVID. And this is where you might actually discover that a segment that was really good before, it had the qualities of identifiable, reachable, substantial, sustainable. Maybe that segment is not as sustainable or stable anymore. And it prompts you to look for another market segment and redefine that market segment through this persona exercise. So really the success of a consumer-based and even a B2B in this post-pandemic market really kind of hinges on, understanding why consumers are making the choices they are in terms of purchasing either online or offline. So this whole topic could be an arena for work with your SBDC counselor. I will tell you that consumer market research is easily available online. For example, I found some research for a client recently that was a payment processing company who surveyed thousands of their customers about their pandemic era online purchase behavior, and they published the results in a report online. So if you're willing to handle the spam that results from downloading some good reporting from people who know, and I know payment processing companies have a good base to survey, you can get access to that data by doing some good Google searches. And I may be able to share some of those examples for you after this program in a follow-up. But let me remind you back to those tools. SBDC counselors can access market research through the SBDC net. If you can narrowly define what you're looking for, very specific inquiries to help define your target market can be done through that kind of research. So any other questions, Laura?
Yeah, we did have a couple. One was just wondering, so this process, going through this and filling out these worksheets, this is just a process to try and place themselves inside the shoes of their ideal customer. Can they create as many ideal customer profiles as they need?
Yes, and that's the idea, is to try and do that. Now, through these exercises, and again, we're going to get to some points where some discerning is probably necessary, is do I have too many segments to handle based on my resources or my budget, or and how will I prioritize them? But the first step is really identifying them. And that's what this exercise is designed to show us, that we probably need to go a little bit deeper in defining our target market and finding those Fs. And that's what this is about. We're kind of
And
just touching the surface.
and the next question is how might someone translate the thinking, feeling, doing, and going for B2B, for business to business type of marketing?
That's a really good question. So there's two answers to that. One, you can think like the firm, and the firm is going to have its own culture, is probably the way that we think of organizations, that you would go into in terms of values. Organizations have values and attitudes and perceptions, just like individuals. Another way, depending on your market and depending on how you use your marketing tools, such as sales tools or CRMs and things, you might really be focusing on the influencers or decision makers, and you could do persona based information on that as well. Because I think that if you're in those industries, you do realize that there are some biases or some thought processes or some shopping behaviors, purchase behaviors, whatever they are, that are particular to the decision makers in one industry over another. And this could be something that you really dig in a little bit deeper and brainstorm with your SBDC counselor, because it is very, it could be very specific, industry specific. So that's a really good question. Thank you for bringing me back to the B2B. Um, I want to mention here that the more concrete that you get this regarding the demographic, psychographic, the more reachable your buyers are going to become. Um, so a healthcare provider noticed that their COVID patients were seeing him more for sports injuries. Um, why? Oh, well, he kind of honed in on it, and it was cycling. So he realized that more people were getting out there, more of his patients were getting out there and doing cycling. So he started to add articles to his website blog specific to cycling. He partnered with some local cycling clubs. He offered no charge online consultation for that kind of injuries. He started to look at media that was targeting, a very reachable group. So again, we're going to get a little bit more, but some of these things rise to the top as you go through the process. Um, some of the times you just need more data. Um, and so my example of my persona, working woman, age, what did I tell? She was in the 25 to 40 with, children within certain drive time. Can I get an actual number for that? Yeah, because all of those demographics, I can actually look at sort of data that's out there in census and other areas. And some of the SBDC counselors could pinpoint this data through the SBDC net, is like how many people are really in that drive time age 25 to 40 with a child, and sort through that to really see, is this a substantial, remember I said it needs to be substantial slash growing, is this a substantial market? Or looking at just general demographic trends that you can get online. Another way, I think it's important to mention another way to find out this information. So let's say a lot of you said this was difficult. Well, how do I find out this missing information? And this applies to consumer versus and B2B. Involve other members of your team. Your frontline workers who have relationship with customers are great sources of this kind of information. They know these people. Um, the part that we're not going to have time to get into is doing customers interviews or surveys, another area that you could dig deeper one-on-one with your counselor or perhaps a third party consultant. So interviews and surveys can be really valuable in getting into that thinking, feeling, getting into that head. Um, Trying to decide, do I have more than one segment? Do I need to break down and segment into smaller segments? You also, if you have a CRM, or you keep any kind of purchase records, event registrations, website forms. You can mine your own data on this. Really, why are you collecting that data? But to use it for this. Obviously, the recency or the currency of the data might have bigger relevancy during COVID. So looking at things within the last 10 to 12 months, might have some value. But if you've been collecting data for a long time, it might be time to really start to use that as you define your persona. Um, so let's look at some next steps that would kind of factor in on this. You're going to build on this activity, hopefully to get a more coherent description. You're going to make sure that they're, as we talked about, identifiable, reachable, sustainable. You might even do, as you finalize this, you might even do what's called a write-up. And companies do this to sort of maybe come up with the name and socialize this persona. And that's used to communicate to other people on your team about marketing so that they can start to talk about, yeah, but does this really apply to Jesse? And they know we're talking about that persona that we're really speaking to when we've crafted this media. I want you to also really think about what we just mentioned. How many segments are there? How many customer personas do I need? Um, you might have done the best customer out of this exercise, but what about if you did the easiest acquisition customer? In other words, the one that it was easiest to get might lend you some insights into reaching and the media of the customers because it came so easily. So think more about the behavior on that. Um, and then ask yourself, are you missing some of the F's? Are there customers that are more attractive than the ones that you have right now? And like I said, working with the SBDC counselors really give you some objectivity and another brain to work with. They have access to Growth Wheel. Actually, Growth Wheel has additional decision seats. The customer segments sheet is another one that really digs down into those areas that we were talking about in segmentation. There's a favorite customers. This one actually does a little bit more of getting into criteria in terms of their lifetime value and referral value. So it's pretty much, it has a weighting system that you would create. And this one actually does help you adapt products and services. We're going to do some of this one in a future great marketing great marketing turnaround webinar. We're going to do some messaging ideas off of this one. So this isn't something that's going to be one size fits all. And again, it's not about using a tool or filling in all of these buckets. It's about making sure you hit each of those criteria, the 4 categories that I mentioned early on. I feel like then these things that you're going to be putting together are going to be something that you're going to move on with the next step that we'll talk about, which is the unique selling proposition. And this is where we start to connect into the actual right audience, right message. So after you've segmented your target market into these groups that are really valuable, and you've made it easier to identify and reach them, we need a little bit more information on communicating that so that we can create the right message. So we'll get onto that next, but first I have a little story that I want to tell you. So a shopkeeper was really upset or dismayed when a competitor came in next door, brand new business, much like his own, opened up, and they put in a huge sign that said "Best Deals." He's like, "Oh my gosh, what am I going to do?" He was really even horrified even more when another competitor opened directly on his other side and announced its arrival with another great sign saying "Low prices." He was panicked, but he got an idea. And so he put the biggest sign of all right above his door, and it said, "Main entrance." So it's supposed to be a humorous story about how the shopkeeper attracted the customers by sort of tricking them into his business. But I think the shopkeeper in the story is really thinking about purchase criteria for his customers. He's thinking that it's price, which may or may not be true. But I really do think it's about having fears that he's not communicating well to his customers in a way that's addressing their criteria. So we talked about addressing their criteria, but we need to think about positioning in the marketplace to serve that specific group of customers and putting it into language that's going to actually meet them. So that story is a clever solution, the middle sign, but it's not exactly how it works. I mean, these days when you're marketing online, you're competing for AdWords and search optimization, and that secret marketing that I shared earlier implies really your success is about making sure that you serve that specific group of customers seeking specific benefits, that formula of right audience, right message, right product, right time. And so our shopkeeper is kind of identifying what is probably one of the most obvious considerations when we talk about something called positioning. So positioning is really important. It's the next element after defining your target market. It helps you refine your messaging. The most obvious consideration in creating a positioning strategy is price. Um, there are a variety of other ways to position. This area could be also, you might have heard it be called value proposition or competitive advantage. Um, so there's a lot of different things that we're going to be thinking about in this next section of the webinar as we go into trying to come up with the criteria for your buyer. Um, Although most of you are muted, when I asked you what the obvious consideration, many of you probably might have said price out loud because it is a powerful tool for product and service positioning. So I do want to address price a little bit before we go on. We're not talking about cost-based pricing right now. We're talking about your marketing or your value-based pricing. Pricing sends a message in your marketing. Some customers or some businesses have been really successful in marketing with very high pricing as they have an appropriate and matching positioning strategy for that. And it works, with their customer market. For example, cars with um, uh, similar specifications can often sell really for much more because they branded luxury cars, Mercedes, Lexus. Certain products, higher price points offer that prestige and exclusivity, but there's a path that took them there that made these products more desirable. Um, for sure, people don't necessarily always want, like our shopkeeper, they don't always necessarily want the least expensive product. Low price sometimes could signal somebody in terms of their decision making. So knowing what's important to people will help you determine how pricing comes into play and whether it is the critical decision making factor. Um, and if it is, you have to take that into account as we build our strategy. Amazon offer underprices the first sale just to get repeat business. So they're acknowledging that as one of the criteria. So without diverting too much time in this session to pricing, I want you to emphasize that understanding your market is going to help you determine the sensitivity to low prices or discounting and whether that should be part of your plan and part of your positioning or whether it should definitely not be part of it. Most entrepreneurs tend to underprice themselves rather than overprice when researched. But I'm going to give you some examples of how this plays out. So I want to pause. I want you to think back to that persona that we've been creating. We're not fully developed, or your primary target market in general. And let's take a stab here for a minute at picking, let's just say, the top two factors that you think would impact this decision to buy your product or service. One of them may or may not be price, but I just want you to write it down somewhere. Maybe you could share it in the chat. Come up with at least two. Maybe there are more, but come up with two factors that you think are highly important to that target market segment that you've been thinking about, that persona that you've been thinking about. So hold on to those most important factors because we're going to come back to it in a bit. But I want to talk a little bit more about what the key to positioning is. Um, So one of the mistakes that are often made is not paying attention to positioning really focuses in on the customer's perception. Once more, getting into the head. Um, if it's about the owner, creator of the product, like a proud parent, this group might have a little bit of a bias on what they think. So this is another reason for investing in your customer personas, getting into their heads, maybe doing some research to get some objectivity. You really need your position to come from the market, the perception of the customer, not from what you think the customer should perceive at this point. The second key part to positioning is other options. Um, so when it comes to other options, there's really two kind of main advantages. One, we already talked about, it's a lower price. So that's one advantage. If you have the same quality and a lower price, that's considered a competitive advantage. Um, Another advantage is the lump sum category of everything else. You provide your customers with something valuable and unique and desirable, but it's not necessarily easily available. So the two keys are it's coming from the customer's perception and it's being compared to other options or your competition. It really requires thinking like your customer. So when it comes to these other options, I like to use a visual for this. So what is the sticking point? How do you figure this out? So I'm going to use a very basic positioning map to kind of give you some idea of the advantages and how we can represent this visually. This is called a positioning or sometimes called a perceptual map. In the most basic form, I have this one based on price and quality. This very generic, but these positioning maps would get much more specific, and we'll show you that in a minute. They can have very, very specific criteria that's most important to your target market. The two criteria here, if we're looking at customer A, what position does this segment A serve? You can respond in chat or just think to yourself. I can't really see the chat, but what do you think position A would be? What is represented by a customer segment in position A? If you're thinking or saying sophisticated buyer or luxury brand seeker, if you said something like those things, you're right on track. What about B? So customer B here has a little bit higher quality, but they're also kind of lower on the price spectrum. Let's use a poll for this one. So I'm going to ask you to choose between some example companies that could be positioned here as B, where customer B is. So Laura will put up the poll. These are three options of what company you think best represents this position B on our positioning map. So is it Walmart? Might have to move your poll over. Is it Costco? Is it Dollar Tree? Just take a quick vote. Don't take too much time in it because we got to move on. Which
All right, a couple more
one?
seconds, and then I'm going to be ending it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Sharing the results with you now, Heidi.
So Costco, bingo. Costco's published mission actually says to continually provide members with quality goods and services at the lowest price. It's literally their mission statement. Now you compare that to Walmart's, who has a positioning statement that says among price sensitive customers. So they still would be down in the lower part of that, but they're really a brand that provides convenience and one-stop shopping. They're not focusing only on quality. So their positioning chart might not even have, other than price, they might not even have quality as the second axis. They would probably have completely different criteria. Real quickly, since Dollar Tree was the other choice, it wouldn't really make sense necessarily for it to be there, but what would be a good position for Dollar Tree? Probably position C, which Retailing Today says Dollar Tree is the unrivaled key of the single price point world, but sticking to their promise, it's really basically everything's $1 and less. Lower price sometimes means lower quality. And so that's kind of the area that might be represented by that third example company that we're familiar with. One more before we move on. Is there an opportunity for a provider at position D? I just want to address this because the top left of the quadrant on a price quality positioning map is really kind of empty or very few providers, because high price and low quality could be seen as a ripoff. Maybe customers wouldn't be loyal. I will say that sometimes a niche product could appear here, but if it does, it's probably going to be much closer to the access in terms of higher quality, um, or else their business model probably might not be successful. So, in your industry, if these were your matrix, you might want to think about where you would be positioned on this map. But I'm going to give you some really quick looks before we do an activity in a few minutes, some really quick looks at some examples to get a better feel of how this visual representation of positioning works. So in this one, I'm using the same broad criteria, price and quality, only we've mapped onto it the automobile industry. So we're looking at this to see, and this is broad criteria, remember, price and quality, only that. The competitive positioning, this is what the perception is of these brands. And you might say, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Up here is Audi, BMW. This is sort of intuitive. I will want to say, to illustrate the competitive positioning, I often ask the audience what they think is the top selling car if this chart was accurate for consumer perception. Um, I know I can't see all your answers, and in the interest of time, I will just tell you that the largest selling brands are right here in this corner, below the quality bar and to the right of the price bar. The world's largest brand in 2019 that had the biggest market share was Toyota. That's Statista.com, a resource for you if you don't know Statista.com for good market information. Volkswagen, Ford, Honda, all of these others were really second, third, fourth in terms of sales. I'm not trying to say that this is a preferred position. I'm just trying to show you that you don't have to have the lowest price or the highest quality to be the leaders. So this is an arena. Another thing I want to point out about this one really quickly is if I'm mini right here, and I'm in this sort of up left quadrant, do you think this is the right position for me? You might say no, because I talked to you about it before. It looks like it might be a bad place to position. High price, low quality. I think you're right, but these might be the wrong criteria for Mini. But Mini does appeal to a segment that in this chart would be positioned here. They articulate their positioning specifically using words like iconic design and go-kart feeling and creative use of space and size. They want to be positioned as the fun and practical. So while size and cost might be one matrix for them, maybe they don't necessarily want this quality matrix. Maybe their buyer criteria has to do with that fun, that design aspect. So these are not necessarily that you will use on your positioning matrix. If we were to do this in the luxury car market, this is an example of changing up the matrix for the same market. So it's the auto industry, but it's just luxury cars. We took out price because that's not a major buyer criteria. If you look at the labels, you can see that the vertical z-axis is, or the x-axis is about um, uh, comfort and performance. These are sort of those feeling things. I guess it's a trade-off in this luxury vehicle area for the customer comfort versus performance. But also the looks are part of it, design, elegance. So these are some of those touchy-feely psychographic opinions, values, attitudes that come into play for the decision making in this market. Also, very quickly, just because for the ladies who might not be interested in cars, an example from beauty product positioning. This refers to sort of the main traits of nail polish. Is it durable? Is it the high quality? Is it, got that durability? Is it bold? Are the color selections good? So again, different criteria. And this one is an actual chart where OPI was the market share leader, and the brand Essie really wanted to position themselves and take over the market share from OPI. So they wanted to put themselves as a higher perceived quality than OPI, ahead of OPI. They wanted to go head to head, so they were building appeal to buyers who are both in this color, bold color and elegant color. So they were going to be right sort of smack on the line. And this was their positioning strategy to compete head to head with OPI. So I know we rushed through the examples, but in the interest of time, I want to go back to the two main criteria and have you do a quick exercise with this. I asked you to think about earlier two aspects of how your customer would make decision. So let's return to that criteria, thinking like the persona, getting into their mind. If you haven't already thought about those two criteria, think about the primary benefits from the customer's perspective. It might take some time, but what I appreciate about the positioning maps, they're very two-dimensional. And so you got to discern and get it down to the top reasons. To help you with this, I'm going to give you a couple of prompts and we'll go through this. To help you with this, what would you say if you were in person talking to a customer about your service or product benefits? Especially if you can only pick two things to tell them, what would you say to a potential customer? And even more so, if at that exact moment you knew they were considering your competition, and boy, the way this happens online all the time, at the exact moment you're selling, somebody else is selling right next to you, what two things, what two criteria? And I want to caution you as you look at this because price and quality were my examples, which are very general. And it's okay to think of general, but as you get down to really creating the right message, you're going to want to get more specific. So I put some general ideas over here that you might draw from. Is reliability an issue? Is tech, high or low tech an issue, decision maker for my target market? Is quality one of those issues? But instead of just quality, I want you to think about how you would really define what you mean by quality for your industry and more importantly for your target market. You know, if it's clothing, is the quality have to do with the material itself, the construction? What aspects of quality are most important? So I know I would love to give you a little bit more time to think about this, but hopefully you're having a couple of ideas that you can use for our exercise as we go forward, um, that you can make more specific perhaps as we go um, a little bit deeper and you work on this outside of the workshop today and outside of our time constraints. But hopefully you have at least two specific criteria to start working with. If you don't worry, you can keep working on it a minute. I do want to emphasize that that generality is something to stay away from. This was a survey that I had come upon some time ago about the businesses who claim that these are their unique advantage. So 31% of them says their service is their unique advantage. And my question is, if other businesses have the same, if 30% of your competition is saying they have the same thing as you do, is it really a point of difference? Would you just be a bubble on top of 20 bubbles in that positioning map? So as you get more specific, it's really a good thing. You may see more areas of comparison when it comes to the competition, but if you can get those areas of differentiation down to something that's more angled in and more address the pain points or the needs of that target market, that customer persona, you're going to be able to work better with that at really positioning yourself against the crowd. All right. So time is short. I'm going to actually skip through a couple of other examples that I had here. So do you need an actual map? Well, we're going to do this exercise, but it's not necessary to have a map. On the other hand, this is not just an academic exercise. The benefits are about the process, and there are reasons that you would want to create an actual map. You can check through a map if you do this that your brand has some real space in the market. It helps you really communicate that place that you hold for your brand. It also is a good way for you to go through the process of saying, how do consumers really perceive my company or brand? And is their perception accurate to what I'm saying my mission and my brand wants to be? So it's that checking in to see if the owner's attributes match what the consumer says about your company. The other reason is that you can use this to identify the gaps in the market or see where you might get crowded out. So it's not making a pretty picture on the map that's important. It's really getting clear about your position. That's what your customers think in relation to the competitive offering. Some maps could get really sophisticated. They could have not only your business, but your competitors. And then they might look at, oh, well, this looks like an area over here that there's a gap in the market. Maybe up here is another gap. Maybe down here is another gap. Maybe I need to pull myself like Essie did outside of the fray and find another arena. So if you're really considering some big changes to your business model, looking at this landscape to try and figure out if those changes puts you in a better position or maybe not a better position. At this point, we're going to take another, maybe not quite 10 minutes or so, but to work with these ideas while they're fresh on your mind to try and envision a map for your business. So this is going to try and get you as clear on why people buy your products, if you have a good difference against your competition, if you're in a saturated space on that whole positioning map or in the market, and maybe you need to revise your model. So we're going to use a simple 2-axis worksheet. This is the second downloadable. If you've not made it ready already, Laura can give you a link to access this, but this one is even more easy to do on a simple piece of paper. It's actually much easier than doing it with the PDF that I'm going to be working with. So using a blank piece of paper or printing this particular handout that we've made available to you is perfectly fine. So get whatever material makes sense for you. If that means opening Adobe, the PDF, or that piece of paper, and then we're going to start this, even realizing we're going to go very fast through it. But we're just trying to get an understanding of the process, and you can come back to it later. So this time, I'm going to pretend I'm a manufacturer of an environmental friendly paint. So I'm going to actually, let me switch back to my PDF. So I'm going to say that I am some company that I'm making up called Earth Eco Paint. So you want to put your company's name, and this is January 21, 2021, in case you do this often as an exercise for various segments and for your positioning map. If you have different products and you do it for different products, you wouldn't even put your company, you might put the product line or the specific products up here. So I'll give you a minute. We're going to next write down the main criteria your customers consider when purchasing your product service. So you should have those handy because this is what I've been asking you already. What are those 2 main criteria that you came up with earlier when I asked you, what are those 2 main criteria? For Earth Eco Paint, they have we'll just call this eco-friendly solutions, and they are longer lasting paint. So I've taken the information that I've put beforehand into this slot here about what the main criteria. Next, I want you to write down whether there are any benefits that your customers are seeking. So thinking less about the features, these are questions to help you, both of these are questions to help you select parameters for comparing them. So we're looking at it kind of from 2 different angles. So for a paint company, maybe the eco-friendly means to me that it's non-hazardous or non-poisonous, not poisonous. So what are really the benefits? I don't know, poisonous benefits of your product? How do those features translate into some benefits, the primary benefits? It's another way at looking at what that criteria is. Sometimes benefits are things that you use in marketing to educate your customer about it. So maybe the longer lasting paint becomes a good value for my customer because they don't have to purchase paint as often. So these, I want you to go and fill out these two sections. I'll give you a couple of minutes um, to fill out those particular questions. We're kind of working through items 1 and 2 in your perception map, whether it's a piece of paper, wanting you to note 2 buying criteria and 2 benefits sought. Maybe price is one of these benefits, but think about the purchase process as you look at this. Think about maybe something in the process, the ease in buying could be one of those benefits. Your actual process. Um, what makes it easier? What features offer the most benefits and fit the needs of your persona? So assuming that you have at least a couple down, we're going to move ahead. We're going to take ideas from these boxes here and use them as our criteria for the positioning map itself. So it's a little tricky in Adobe, so bear with me. If you're doing it on paper, it's a little bit easier. I'm going to have to use the comment tool in Adobe. But let's just say that out of these that I'm going to make a choice for Earth Eco Paint. And let's say I'm going to make long lasting on this vertical axis. So long lasting is the benefit. And for lack of a better phrasing, I'm just going to use short lasting or not as long lasting. And let's say the eco qualities of it that have to do with um, the components that are the eco-friendly, non-hazardous. Let's say less eco is on one side of the horizontal axis and more eco is on the other. So you're choosing from these arenas what you want to make your main criteria for this position map. It doesn't mean you wouldn't do other position maps. And remember, this is the eyes of the customer. So now I'm going to say, and I have to use the comment tool to do this, but I'm going to say, where do I exist as a in the eye of a customer? Where does my product or company exist on this map? Well, I am Earth Eco Paint, and I am very long lasting, and I've got tests on my product to prove this. And I've got certifications to show my economic friendly solution. So I'm going to put my business right up here in this corner. And I want you to do the same. I want you to find where your product stands on the criteria that you've come up with. And maybe you're going to draw a symbol, to represent that rather than the words. And again, it's not important how you do it. I just want you to find a position for your organization. Now, a little bit more challenging might be to think about your competitors. So you're going to mark the position of hopefully more than one, but at least one competitor. I'm going to think of, I'm not a paint expert, this isn't my market, but I can think of Behr Paint. Let's say that Behr Paint is a long lasting paint, but they're not very eco. They're made of some stuff that's not very eco. So I might put, I don't know how to spell it. Behr is Behr, Behr Paint. I might put Behr Paint over here as a position. And maybe I have some other paints that I can do. Maybe there's, I don't know brands, but cheap brand paint that is down here. And the idea that I'm trying to get across on my example here is that I want you to plot these other competitors on the positioning map. And this is using your best guesstimate at this point. If you have evidence, and we can talk about how to get more evidence, but right now I want you to use what I call your best guess method of where your competitors would be from the customer's mindset. If you can be objective from the customer's mindset. So I'll give you a few more minutes to complete your positioning map, adding as many customers as you can. So we're actually on to the last step. These are the steps we've completed on our positioning map. So if you find yourself wondering, I really don't know where I would put my competitor on this or that, might be representing the need for doing some customer research, doing some market intelligence. These activities aren't going to always yield instantaneous answers. They may show where you might need to do a little bit more or spend a little more time doing a little bit more work. Another thought is, if you see in your map that there's a wide open space, you might ask yourself, is there a competitor in this space that I'm missing? Think about the space itself and see if there's a competitor that maybe is more eco but short lasting. Just if I missed something by looking at the spaces. Another trigger as you look at this map, if you have found that you and your competition are clustered and you have a bunch of the competition all around you on top of each other, then maybe that's a sign that your criteria is too general and is not specific enough. You're not differentiating. So instead of just being the best Italian food, are you the best place for cannolis? Or think about a more specific way using that customer persona, going back there to try and address that customer persona's needs or the changes in the COVID marketplace to come up with something. And if we had unlimited time, I'd give you more time on this, but I want to kind of move forward and wrap this up. Before we debrief, I want to do another poll. We only plotted 2 criteria. We kept it simple, and many of you may not have added very many competitors, but Laura has a poll to put up that I want you to think about. So looking at your map, how does your positioning reflect the answer that you gave from your business specialty at the beginning of the webinar? So remember I asked you, what's your specialty? I want you to look at your map now and think back to, and if you didn't answer it because you weren't live, we did say, hey, what's your specialty? Um, so think about your answer or what you thought your specialty was at the beginning of the webinar, and then tell me, is your positioning exactly the same, just like you said, or is it more defined? Maybe it's similar, but there's a different little component that you didn't have before, or maybe it's just much more expanded in terms of how you're positioning. I'll give you another few seconds. So some of you said exactly the same, and I heard early in the specialty that there were some very general and generic descriptions. So I would say if it's the same, maybe you can clarify a little bit, and I will be showing you how to do that with the articulation of a unique selling principle. For many of you, it's more defined, and this is the idea as you continue working with this, that you would refine, expand, and get this to be more detailed. 10 minutes is not enough to make all the discoveries you would need. But as you dig into this, really delve deeper into these concepts of positioning, there are some processing questions that you can ask. We are wanting to think about factors that maybe you would improve upon that would create a better position to appeal to your target market. So going back to that persona, are there areas that you could actually develop that would give you a better competitive edge? Are there opportunities for product redesign? Is there opportunities to really address maybe some pain points for either a new customer or your existing customer that are related to changes brought on by COVID? So I want you to look at that. In addition, some of the things that you used to market that you thought were really important might be less important. And why is this? Because you only have so much share of mind and time to communicate. So thinking about what you might have learned about what's less important to your customer, either through the target market exercise or the positioning the customer's perception against your competition, maybe what's less important. Um, Remember the original goal, right product and right message to right customer at the right time. I always think that this is a good opportunity to look at ways that you can distance your company from the competitors because it's so visual. So that's another area that you could do. And then again, I always think about how do you make this more objective because we just use the best guesstimate. But there's a lot of ways that we can find out what it's the most important criteria. We talked about the survey. Um, you can do primary market research, but you can also use that secondary data that might be out there. The better you get at making this objective, the more this will help you. But there's a lot of really sort of informal ways to do it. The pizza entrepreneur could ask his current loyal customers why they like his pizza over others and really have them rate the importance of certain features like is it taste, is it size, is it ingredients, is it the way that I clean my place during COVID? I just think getting more granular and getting those honest. You would really be surprised how honest people are when you ask about in specific ways how to improve your service. And the internet is one tool that can be used to do that. And sometimes you have to incentivize that because people are being asked more often now what they think about things. But just realize the more objective, the more thorough, the more adept that you do this, the better the results are going to be. But even this little short research-based exercise is hopefully giving you a few insights that you can use to perfect your marketing strategy. I did want to show you that Growth Wheel, I didn't use it, but Growth Wheel has a tool for positioning. It's a little bit more complex, but I did want to show you that that's something that if you're working with an SBDC counselor, you could delve into positioning using Growth Wheel. So next steps. So spend some time fine tuning this, asking yourself if it rings true, what you're putting on paper rings true with what is happening in your business with customers right now. Asking yourself if your position is actually unique. And then the homework that I want to give you, should you choose to accept it, is that once you have a solid idea of your position, or you think you do, I want you to turn it into a one sentence, what I call unique selling principle, your USP, your value proposition. I actually have a template that you could use for this that I can provide this to you after the session. But let me explain it a little bit in a real quick because we're getting to the end of our time. So what this one sentence will do is it will compare or it will put in a nice neat little short package what that unique benefit or differentiation is, that positioning is, so that you can use it as the litmus test for your future messaging. So it's kind of important to do that for each and every market segment that you have to create that USP. It's really the first step that we're going to be building on in the future sessions. That's why it's homework. So I want you to work with your counselor if you choose to. It would be a great for you to even start to examine your own marketing efforts that you've been doing. Maybe you can start right away at adjusting some wasteful promotion if it's not matching what you're coming up with in your customer persona. Other steps that you can take would be to keep coming back. So we have 2 more sessions of the Great Marketing Turnaround. And those sessions are going to be on February 4th and February 18th right now. I believe they're on the calendar already or will be soon. So these next sessions are going to get more into that right customer, right product, right message, right timing. We'll actually do at the very end measuring, because data informed decision making is one of the keys at having sort of a very sustainable strategy in your plan. Laura, can you provide registration links in the chat?
Yep, those are already in the chat for you.
Okay.
So it's a link to all of our events. The ones that Heidi has coming up are labeled as the Great Marketing Turnaround.
And we have just enough time for a few questions, if there are any at this time.
We do have one question going back to the customer persona section. So this person asks, your customer persona is influenced by a known market intelligence in a fast changing, particularly in this pandemic environment. How do you know that your assumptions about behaviors are still valid and competitors are acting the same as before?
Okay, so if I understand the question, I think we're really talking about the fact that you would have to update this constantly as our market is moving very fast. And indeed, that is probably the biggest challenge that marketers have today, is the fast pace. I would say that you can still do this process and make these decisions. This is why a lot of the research data that I talked about that is COVID specific related could be valuable, where somebody else has done some of that research. I will include in the follow-up a link to some sources for that type of research, some examples, but you might have to do some of your own online research, or work with a SBDC counselor at refining your questions so that you can use that secondary data, or continue to work with your own staff, your own customers, to communicate with them. Depending on your type of business and your market, you should be talking to your customers about these things that matter. Now that you know what things matter, talking to them frequently and communicating with them frequently, engaging them on social media. We talked about market surveys. You can use pop-ups on your website. This idea of engagement and building customer relationships is something that will help inform this and evolve. I hope I've answered that one a little bit. Any others?
No, we have had some questions about PowerPoints. Again, if you are interested in getting this PowerPoint deck, we're not offering the PowerPoint, but we may be able to send you a PDF version of this presentation.
Yeah, we can do that. Okay. So thank you for joining us. I would like to send you the USP template and maybe some of the other links I mentioned above, the articles on these topics, personas, positioning. So I have a scratch my back kind of offer. I really appreciate feedback. We just talked about how you perfect things and how you get information. So we ask you for feedback so we can perfect our own products and talk more to our own customers about identifying their needs and their attitudes about what we're offering. So if you would please complete the survey, I will go ahead and send you that template for the USP, so you can easily do that homework assignment. You can just put your email address in that survey at the end of the evaluation. And as I mentioned in some of those next steps that I keep mentioning, the SBDC counselors are your resource. Many of you are already working with a counselor. Counselors don't just provide the expertise, but they also lend to that objectivity, another head working on these issues. So here's the link to, if you would like to start working with an SBDC counselor, you need to fill out a request for counseling form. And upcoming webinars, we've got several of them coming out. You can find them all on the events page at the Maricopa SBDC website. In addition to the Great Marketing Turnaround, if you're interested in webinars, we're continuing our relief funding webinars on the COVID reliefs. We've also got some upcoming financial webinars. And then for restaurants specifically, a great new series is coming up with regulation changes as being the topic for the first one. And at that, with no minutes practically to spare, I want to thank you all for staying with me on this very fast-paced sampling of some of the exercises that will contribute to documenting and creating a marketing strategy that you can keep building on in this COVID times.
One thing I do want to mention is if you do put your email at the end of the survey, just be aware that it will no longer be anonymous. So if you'd like to message me or email me back, you got the registration link from me, then we can send it to you that way for that USP statement that Heidi was talking about. And
Thank
there's
you.
no more questions, Heidi, so we're going to go ahead and end this webinar. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon, and we hope to see you all in our future webinars.
Thank you, Laura.
Thanks. Bye.